Welcome to the intro for episode 7 of Shane Talks Podcast, the James Bond episode. When we first started talking last night, I had no idea that we were going to end up going nearly 3 hours discussing James Bond. We do cover 26 movies, a TV show, James Bond Jr., the GoldenEye video game, and influenced by James Bond properties. So there's a lot going on. Because it came in at almost 3 hours, I've decided to divide it up over 2 weeks of episodes. So this week you'll get the first hour and 20 minutes, which covers pretty much Sean Connery and Roger Moore, and a couple of the random one-off movies that got made during that time. And then next week I'll upload the second half of this conversation, which will include Timothy Dalton, Pierce Brosnan, Daniel Craig, and some other random stuff at the end. So, hopefully breaking up into 2 videos will make it easier to watch, or if you want to hear everything right now, the audio version is the complete, unedited, almost 3-hour cut is available immediately. So, thank you very much for listening. Welcome to the 7th episode of Shane Talks. Today is a special 007 episode where we're going to focus all entirely on James Bond. We're going to go through the history of James Bond, all the actors who played James Bond, all the James Bond movies, but we're going to do it pretty quickly because a lot of the older ones, especially Sean Connery ones, I don't really remember very well. So to help me out today, I have brought on my good friend Brandon Yotter, who is a James Bond aficionado, in my opinion. He, a couple of years ago, wrote a lot of articles for the internet that broke down every single one of the James Bond movies. So I'm going to have him give us a bunch of his input that were in those articles. And I've got my regular cohort, Jason Maier, with me, who is along to provide color commentary and keep us on track, because I'm known to go on tangents sometimes and make something that should be very short into a 2-hour discussion that doesn't need to be 2 hours. Brandon and I have suited up for tonight. Brandon is drinking a martini, and Jason and I are drinking beer. So, the first thing that I want to start with is Ian Fleming worked for the British Navy during World War II. That's when he created the character of James Bond. He wrote his first Bond novel in 1952, which was Casino Royale, which has been adapted 3 different times, and we will get to those throughout this discussion. During my research into Ian Fleming this week, the thing that I learned that I was completely unaware of was the fact that he wrote the book Chitty Chitty Bang Bang that the movie was based on. So I thought that was pretty cool. I had no idea that a guy that wrote spy novels also wrote, apparently, one kid's book. So let's just dive in here. We want to address the fact that most people believe Sean Connery was the first person who ever played James Bond, and that is incorrect. Brandon, you want to give us who the first real James Bond was?
It'd be Barry Nelson.
Barry Nelson?
I'm sure we all know who Barry Nelson is, right?
I hang out with him on the weekends, man.
Ooh.
All right, so where and how much earlier was Barry Nelson James Bond?
Quite a bit earlier. It was in the 50s, I believe. It was a CBS Playhouse episode.
Okay.
Where they did a 1-hour version of Casino Royale.
Nice.
Which
was the first book as well, correct?
Yeah.
Casino Royale was the first book, and so the first 1-hour TV episode was done. If my research is correct, the book was published in 1952, and then this was 1954 that CBS made that episode.
Sounds right. I'll give you that.
So, that's what Wikipedia tells me.
Brandon, you said that you have not seen that version, the 1-hour version?
I have not. Obviously, TV in the 50s, they didn't save a lot of tape, so it's kind of hard to come by. I think parts of it might be on YouTube, but I don't know if the whole thing is.
I didn't get a chance to look that up, but I did read the Wikipedia entry for it. It says that in the 80s, the entire episode was found and then bought by Paramount.
Oh, really?
So somebody, and well, the weird thing is they say that it was aired in color, but the tape version that they found of it was in black and white. So, kind of just interesting tidbits about that.
Yeah, I'd love to see it. I feel like it's the one hole in my James Bond.
There we go. So let's go ahead and jump into the movies now. Obviously, the first movie James Bond that everybody knows is Sean Connery. 1962 was the first movie, and that would be Dr. No. Here's my recollection of Dr. No.
Okay.
Dr. No's got metal hands.
Yep.
Spectre is introduced in this movie.
Yep.
Dr. No is trying to stop a space shuttle launch because he wants to start a war between the U.S. and Russia.
Yep.
Is that pretty accurate?
Yeah.
Okay.
So he was this brilliant scientist, and he offered his services to both the U.S. and Russia. It was Cold War, nuclear arms race, and all that. Both turned him down, and so he was like, "Well, screw you guys. I'm just going to make you fight each other and take all the glory."
So another thing, this week, my research into James Bond, I've learned a lot more than I ever thought I would trying to get ready for this episode. Growing up, I always thought that every Bond girl had a super sexualized name. Like, that was just something growing up. I just put it together with James Bond and a super sexy Bond girl. I learned that's not true. There are very few sexualized Bond girl names. However, in Dr. No, we had Honey Rider, which is I'd give it a little bit of a sexualized name. Not as good as some of the other ones, but better than some of the other ones. Yeah. So that was our first Bond girl in Dr. No. Next up, 1 year later, they did From Russia with Love, which was a revenge film against Spectre. Spectre. It's a Spectre revenge film because they're mad at James Bond for killing Dr. No. Blofeld's first on-screen appearances here, but you don't actually get to see him. It's very much like the bad guy in Inspector Gadget. Like you just see him petting his Dr. Claw. Yeah, you just see him petting his cat in the movie, if I remember right.
Petting his cat.
Rosa Klebb and Tatiana Romanov are the Bond girls from this one.
So Rosa Klebb is actually like the main villain.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
So Blofeld sends her to basically do his bidding.
Okay.
And then she has another like a chess master that helps her come up with the plot. It's actually really good. It's one of my favorite movies.
Okay.
What's
your opinion on Dr. No? Good or bad? You enjoy Dr. No?
Surprisingly, it's one I loved as a kid. Okay. As an adult, I find it a little bit slow, but even for the time, it was fast. Okay. So compared to a lot of movies from the 60s, like the way it's cut, it cuts on action. You don't see one camera with somebody entering the room and you see the entire experience until somebody leaves the room. It was kind of considered revolutionary, even though we find it slow now.
Gotcha. And then From Russia with Love, you say is one of your favorites.
Yeah, it kind of takes that next step. It feels like a much more modern movie. Outside of a couple moments, there's one where he's checking into his hotel room and he's looking around, seeing if there are any bugs. And it's like a 3-minute one shot of him just like looking behind paintings. And the whole time, the James Bond theme song is just blaring.
Oh, nice.
So it sounds like he's in the middle of this big action car chase or something, but he's just like meandering around the hotel room, like peeking behind the blinds. And it's like, calm down, guys.
So I've got written down that Romanova is a Soviet who is trying to defect, and James Bond is trying to help her.
Yeah.
Is there more to the plot than that?
Yeah. So Blofeld tells Rosa Klebb to find somebody that they can trick the English government into thinking is defecting.
Okay.
They have this. It's like a communicator that decodes Russian messages.
Okay.
And so they want to use that as kind of the MacGuffin to kind of lure James Bond out after killing Dr. No. Like you said, they want to. And so, yeah, they use Tatiana to do this, to give him the decoder and make it look like she's defecting. But kind of over the course of the movie, he makes her actually defect. And
right on.
Yeah.
So, and correct me if I'm wrong. In my Spectre in these at the beginning of these with Dr. No and From Russia with Love, is it the same kind of? It's like a secret society of bad people doing bad stuff. Is
pretty much, yeah.
Okay, and that's the Spectre that ends up in the Daniel Craig movies as well.
Yeah. It's the same idea. It's like all of these powerful people kind of living in the shadows from different countries that kind of run everything behind the scenes.
Okay.
So they aren't aligned to a particular country or anything. Red Grant is the henchman, and he's English. So
I've got it up here that Rosa Klebb is listed in the credits as Spectre number 3. Mm-hmm. And then in a couple movies, we're going to meet Spectre number 2. Apparently, that's kind of like their hierarchy system. Like, Blofeld is Spectre number 1, and so you kind of just get a number and you move up as people die, I guess.
Yep. If memory serves, the chess guy is like Spectre 11.
Okay.
So it's very much a hierarchy.
This is pretty crazy. Looking at the release dates, yeah, I mean, like Sean Connery literally did nothing but James Bond for like
it's
4
like 6
years.
movies in 7 years or something like that. It's crazy.
So we jump one more year to 1964, and we have Goldfinger, which gave us 2 Bond girls, one with a great name, one with a crappy name. We got Pussy Galore and Jill Masterson.
Yeah, pretty boring.
So, all right, so I got up here, Goldfinger's the villain. Bond investigates gold smuggling and then learns of Goldfinger's plot to contaminate the gold at Fort Knox.
Yes, that is all correct.
That's correct. Okay.
So
that's such an evil plot.
What's the purpose of contaminating gold at Fort Knox?
It makes his gold worth money.
Yeah.
He's going to devalue all the irradiated gold that the U.S. uses to back their dollars. So not only is he crumbling the U.S. economy, but he's also making the gold that he has worth more in the moment.
Okay.
Right on, Jason. You're a genius. I will say, From Russia with Love, like I said, is one of my favorites.
Yep.
It's one of the few that he actually does a lot of spy work, and he doesn't just kind of fall into everything working out in his favor.
Okay.
But Goldfinger is when they establish a lot of the Bond tropisms.
Oh, okay.
So he starts getting kind of the funky gadgets and, like you said, with the Bond girl names. And
is Goldfinger the one where he parachutes down and lands on the yacht or whatever, where the chick is out like sunbathing?
No, that's Timothy Dalton one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So Goldfinger, good, bad, your opinions? If it introduces the tropes, does that give it a special place for you?
A little bit. I feel of all of them, it's the most dated, not in production, but in kind of social terms.
Okay.
He's like much more of a womanizer in this one, and kind of that kind of a stuff. Like it might be one of the harder ones to watch these days, but it has some really good moments, like when they're golfing and when he goes to the lair and all of that. Like it's entertaining to watch.
Right on. As Jason said, 1 year later, Sean Connery was back for his 4th movie, Thunderball, which introduced us to Emilio Largo, also known as Spectre number 2. Our female villains are our Bond girls are Domino Derval and Fiona Velope. And did you say you're drinking a Velope tonight?
No, I'm drinking a Vesper.
A Vesper. Oh yeah. Okay, there you go. So this says the plot is Bond attempts to find 2 atomic bombs that were stolen by Spectre.
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Is that the plot?
This is not one of my favorites.
Okay.
It's one of the highest grossing, actually.
Oh, is it?
It's pretty popular among like older Bond fans. there
Is
are
this the one where he's got a jetpack at some point?
That's the next one.
Okay.
This like a third of it is filmed underwater.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
So it was like super expensive to make, and it was like revolutionary at the time. Actually, all the underwater scenes were shot by Raku Browning, the guy who did Creature from the Black Lagoon. So it was like a big deal. But if you think about it, it's all underwater, so there's no talking. Everybody's moving slowly. Like there are these huge fight scenes that are just not impressive because it's like in slow motion. Honestly, the 2 times ago when I watched it, I bumped the remote during one of the underwater scenes, and it started going in 1.5 speed. And I was like, oh my God, I just figured out how to enjoy this movie.
Nice.
Because it makes everything like normally speed, and so it's not my favorite. There are a couple of really cool things in it. There are a lot of there's this one scene where there's a swimming pool that's connected to like the ocean, I think, or a shark tank or something, via this little passageway. And James Bond has his rebreather in there, and he's going to swim through the tunnel. But they didn't tell Sean Connery that sharks would be coming out of the tunnel. And so if you watch the movie, there's this one scene where he like moves aside this door to go into the tunnel, and this great white shark comes out, and there's just like complete terror on his face. That's real.
Oh, wow.
Sean Connery was not expecting that.
That's insane.
And knowing Sean Connery, he probably came up swinging after that.
Oh, he was pissed. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
He was already kind of overplaying James Bond at this point because he signed this huge contract and was getting paid like pennies at this point. So yeah, he was not happy.
Wow.
Yeah. But this one has a cool gadget, the rebreather that I mentioned.
Yeah.
It's like this little guy that's that big, and he puts it in his mouth, and it basically takes the oxygen out of the water so he can breathe while he's under there.
Okay.
And the U.S. military was so fascinated by it that they reached out to the producers to figure out how they made this, because they wanted to use it in their they wanted like their Marines to be able to use it, and they're like, yeah, this is a movie, it's not a real thing. But
wow,
the government was like, I'll be damned with that. And they put like 5 years of research into trying to figure out how they could do this.
And come on, I mean, like Star Wars even had rebreathers, man. And they probably got convinced on that, and were like, hey, how do we, George Lucas?
Still not a real thing.
You figured it out, didn't you?
Even skipping 10 years ahead, it's still not a real thing. But yeah, they were. Yeah.
That's crazy.
Oh, wow.
The only other story I have about Thunderball is it starts off with a red herring. It's at a funeral.
Okay.
And the side of the coffin says JB. So you think it's James Bond's funeral.
Oh, okay.
And he is in disguise as somebody's. But it's a really interesting kind of moment for a cold opening where you're like, whoa, what is happening? Is he faking his death, or
gotcha.
He's trying to draw out the bad guy?
Bad guys, gotcha. So
Pretty
now we're going to jump ahead a couple of years to 1967. In 1967, we've got a really awkward situation that happened. We had 2 James Bond movies that came out 3 months apart. In April of 1967, we had a non-Sean Connery film, the second iteration of Casino Royale, starring David Niven. Apparently, the story that I got online was Charles Feldman bought the rights to the book Casino Royale before Eon Pictures could buy it. So he owned the rights to it, and he took it to Eon and said, hey, let's make this movie together. And they couldn't come to terms on making the movie together. I don't know who was in the wrong or whatever. So he then decided to take his rights to Columbia to make the movie. But when he shifted it over to Columbia, he decided to turn it into a comedy. And apparently for anybody that knows the 2006 Casino Royale, this sounds like it's nothing like it, because the plot revolves around James Bond using 6 agents, all pretending to be James Bond, so that he can draw out the villain group Smirsh.
So in the books, they start off as Smirsh until they get to, I think, the Thunderball book, when they become Spectre.
Okay. So Smirsh is like the origin of Spectre.
Exactly.
Okay.
So I'm guessing they didn't have the rights to Spectre, but they did have the rights to Smirsh because they had the Casino
book. Gotcha. So have you seen this one, and what's your thoughts on that?
I was so excited to watch this movie. So it's got David Niven. What's his name? I know Orson Welles is in it. He plays the Shiv.
Oh,
yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Which actually, he had been in talks to play Goldfinger, but wanted too much money. Anyway, who's the other guy? Peter Sellers.
Oh, okay. Oh, nice.
So I was super excited to watch this movie. I love Peter Sellers. I'm like, a James Bond comedy. It's going to be great. But apparently the production of the movie was so terrible. Like, 2 people just walked off, like refused to continue filming. And so they had to like rewrite the script around them.
Wow.
People like, die off screen. There's like a 3-minute period where you're just looking at the landscape, because like, I think it was Orson Welles had walked off, and so they didn't get his last scene.
Oh.
And so they have like David Niven say, "I'm going to kill you now," and like walk off screen, and then it's just like all this ADR sound as he like fights Orson Welles. It's so bad.
Oh, that sucks.
So bad. I wanted to like it, and I did not at all.
Well, then a couple months later in June, we got Sean Connery back as James Bond in You Only Live Twice, which was the first official appearance of Blofeld, who was played by the amazing Donald Pleasance. As a Halloween fan, like, Donald Pleasance is my dude. I do remember this movie because of the fact that it has Donald Pleasance in it. I'm pretty sure in my lifetime I have seen all of the James Bond movies, but not all of them have stuck with me. This is one that I do remember because of Donald Pleasance. Yeah. Bond is in Japan investigating American and Soviet spaceships that have gone missing. He learns that Blofeld's responsible for it, and he is trying to just cause problems for Cold War stuff. Like, he's trying to cause, he stole a Russian satellite and an American spaceship or whatever, so that he can get us mad at each other to like try to escalate to World War III or whatever. And then Kissy Suzuki is our Bond girl.
Yep. She's Japanese. What else would she be named?
Book me and book you.
But yeah, so what else is there that's important about this one? Which I guess there's only a 4-year gap for Sean Connery after this one.
Yeah. So I actually love this movie. It's another one that's a little hard to watch now, but for completely different reasons.
Okay.
About 80% of Austin Powers is making fun of this movie.
This movie? Gotcha.
So as much as I love it because it's a good balance of like camp and action, it's kind of hard to watch now because even the serious parts have been turned into jokes 30 years ago. So it's kind of disappointing, but I will say that the budget for Dr. No was $1 million.
Okay.
And this one, just the villain's lair, like the volcano lair, cost $1 million to make.
Wow.
The total budget was 9.5. So just over these like 4 years, 5 years, or whatever it was, like, the production value has gone way, way up, and you can see it on screen. So I really appreciated that.
Is it a huge? Is it an uptick, kind of like what we're seeing with like the superhero movies and stuff, how like Dr. No was like, it made some money and it was good money. And then it just kept like each one just kept taking off more and more.
At this point, yes.
Okay.
So like Dr. No was 1 million budget. From Russia with Love was 2. So it just kind of kept doubling. Once we get into the Roger Moores, you'll see that it kind of levels out around 30 million for about a decade, which is more than enough for the movies that they were making at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Bond fever was kind of at its height at this point. Sean Connery was super burned out. Like I said before, he was still on his initial contract, so he was making like, a couple $100,000 at most for doing these movies, and they were making
millions of dollars,
ridiculous amounts of money, and he's getting like pennies to the dollar.
So I assume that's what led to him not being in 1969's On Her Majesty's Secret Service.
Yeah.
His contract was over with You Only Live Twice. He was burnt out, like you said, didn't want to come back. And so somehow, you need to explain to me how George Lazenby became our James Bond, because this story is ridiculous from what I remember.
Yeah, he was an Australian model, and they're basically like they did a bunch of auditions, and he wasn't a good actor, but they thought he looked the part. So they're like, we can teach him how to act. Let's hire this guy. And it turns out they couldn't teach him how to act.
Didn't he get in like really good with one of the producers, like outside of the audition process?
Yeah, I think somebody kind of brought him to the attention of
was it a Joey Tribbiani moment?
Probably.
How you doing?
Yeah. So they kind of brought him in and was like, yeah, he should really be the guy.
Yeah, like I feel like from what I read, like I can't remember, like it was one of the producers or something. He met them at like a party or something, and like bullshitted his way into convincing them that he like. From what I remember reading, he like literally like just talked his way into this part, like convincing them I can do this, I can be your guy, let's do it. And then, if I remember right, it was kind of a financial success, but then he demanded like an insane amount of money to do another movie, and they were like, nah, you weren't that good, we aren't going to pay you.
No, that's actually not true.
Okay.
So as soon as the premiere of the movie, he just became a huge hippie.
Okay.
If red carpet premiere, he has like a huge beard, and he's like he thought Bond was too commercial. Okay. And all of his hippie friends convinced him that he should drop Bond because it wasn't modern enough, and it wasn't
Okay.
It didn't fit his lifestyle. And so he's like, yeah, I shouldn't be Bond anymore. And he backed out of his contract. He actually had to return some of the money that he had been paid for his contract.
Okay. That's very bizarre.
Shia LaBeouf, huh?
Oh, yeah. It was a huge mistake.
So 2 years later, okay, good.
I really like On Her Majesty's Secret Service, despite that. He is not great. But it's another good character piece. I feel like the best Bonds are the ones that are written well.
Okay.
Like I said, From Russia with Love was a really good spy movie. This is a really good one. He falls in love. He gets married.
Oh, yeah. Hold on. Here we go. We didn't even address this yet. The plot that I have written down for this movie is Blofeld plans to ruin the world's food supply.
Kind of.
Okay.
So, okay.
And it's not Donald Pleasance. Let's address that. Donald Pleasance played Blofeld once, unfortunately, and then they've brought in other actors for every other movie.
Yes. And the odd thing about this movie, so the book On Her Majesty's Secret Service is before the book You Only Live Twice.
Okay.
And obviously in You Only Live Twice, Bond meets Blofeld. There's a big showdown at the end.
Yep.
But then they get to this movie, never seen each other before.
Oh, really?
Blofeld doesn't know who Bond is. Bond doesn't know who Blofeld is because they're adapting the book and they stay really close to the book.
Oh, wow.
Which in the book series, it's before they've met. So it makes absolutely no fucking sense.
Okay.
Was Fox in charge of this?
So Contessa Teresa Di Vincenzio is the Bond girl that he eventually married. What's that?
Vincenzo.
Vincenzo is the Bond girl who he marries in this movie, and that apparently comes up again a couple of movies later.
Yeah, so despite reason and the fact that the movies span like 40 years, they keep playing to the fact that he was married. So there's one Roger Moore movie even where he's like standing at her grave.
At her grave, yep.
And it's like they have her the year that she died, the year the movie came out, on her grave, and it was like 10 years before, and it's like, you're not 10 years older than you were back then. Like,
so does she die on Her Majesty's Secret Service, or does she die in a later movie?
Yeah, spoiler alert. She dies at the end.
She dies in which one?
At the end of this one.
At the end of this. Okay, gotcha.
So basically, the last scene is their wedding. And then Bond is driving away with her in the passenger seat, and he's retired, and they're like, where should we go? Well, we can go anywhere. And they stop because like the groomsmen put flowers all over the car.
Okay.
And he's like, we should really remove these if we're going to be just driving around. And so he pulls over to the side of the road and takes off the roses and the flowers and everything. And Blofeld drives by, and his second in command has like a Tommy gun and basically like shoots her in the head. So she dies.
Now, were they trying to just kill her? Or were they trying to kill both of them and like Bond dove out of the way? Or okay, they weren't just targeting her.
Right. Okay. It was like Q car. He dives behind it and gets protected by the bulletproof metal, and she takes a bullet right to the head.
Ooh. And then like they just drive away and the movie's over.
Yeah. It ends with George Lazenby holding Teresa in his arms, her dead body, saying, oh, it's fine. We have all the time in the world.
Whoa. I need to watch this one. I know I've never seen this one.
It's really good.
Okay, I need to watch
I will say, as good of a character piece as it is for Bond, the villain's plot is absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, he wants to ruin the world's food supply. That sounds pretty dumb to me.
Right. He wants to do this by hypnotizing a bunch of 20-year-old women who are all attractive, of course, into planting bombs around the world, basically.
Like planting bombs in like food, like places that make food?
I guess.
Oh, okay.
It's really vague. He gets them there by saying that he's treating their allergies, their food allergies.
Okay.
But if you really pay attention, it's all like super, I don't want to say racist, but kind of racist.
Oh, okay.
Like there's this girl from Iowa that's allergic to corn. And so he cures her of her corn illness. There's a black girl that's allergic to fried chicken. So he cures her of her fried chicken allergy.
Wow.
So yeah, there's about 20 girls from around the world that he cures. But the whole time they're there, he's hypnotizing them into doing his bidding.
Interesting.
So that part is absolutely ridiculous.
Okay, yeah.
But if you ignore that, Bond's story is very serious, very good.
All right, I'm gonna have to definitely watch that one because I've never seen that.
It might be a top 5 for me.
Okay. That's okay. Then we go to 1971 and the end of the original Sean Connery era. Oh yeah, go ahead.
One more thing for Her Majesty's Secret Service. The song was done by it's called All the Time in the World, which, like I said, is the last line of the movie. It's done by Louis Armstrong.
Okay.
I was really into jazz when I was in high school. Loved Louis Armstrong. And one of my favorite little tidbits for this movie is that it was the last song that he ever recorded.
Oh, wow.
He died, I believe, 2 months later.
That's pretty crazy.
But yeah, it's a really, really good song. Love Louis Armstrong.
Nice.
Worth checking.
All right, so then we go 2 years later to 1971, and we come to the end of the real Sean Connery era with Diamonds Are Forever, which was also the initial ending to Spectre for the most part. So I liked the fact that Dr. No introduced Spectre with Sean Connery, and then Diamonds Are Forever, for the most part, was the end of Spectre until the reboot.
Yeah, that's due to a lawsuit over the rights.
Oh, okay.
So Thunderball was co-written between Ian Fleming and this other guy, McClure, I think was his name. And he wasn't credited in the movie, so he kind of sued for the rights to the Thunderball and got it. And since that's the book where they introduce Spectre.
Okay.
He also got the rights to Spectre, and that's why you don't see them again until
way
Christoph
later.
Waltz. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So Bond goes undercover as a diamond smuggler.
Mm-hmm.
He ends up learning that Blofeld is behind acquiring diamonds to build a space laser.
Yep.
And
go on.
Tiffany Case was our Bond girl.
Yep.
Which is a pretty lame name.
It's a play on Tiffany's.
Yeah.
Jewelers.
So space laser, huh?
Yeah, space laser.
Yeah. Yeah, this is not the movie where they go to outer space.
That's another one that you see a lot. There are a lot of space lasers in James Bond for some reason. It's gonna come back.
And why wouldn't you?
I will say it's the coolest thing about this movie for me is seeing the Las Vegas Strip as it was in 71.
Oh, okay.
So as James Bond movies are made, they're kind of made around locations. Back in the 70s and 60s, it wasn't as easy to travel as it is now. So they would be highlighting these awesome locales that people wouldn't be able to get to. And the coolest thing about watching these old James Bond movies is at the time that they were made, they were seen as a travel log. And as somebody put it to me recently, watching old James Bond movies is like watching a time travel log. You're seeing, Las Vegas Strip as it was in 71. And as somebody who's been to Vegas within the last 5-10 years, it's completely different now. And just kind of looking back at all of these movies, From Russia with Love, they ride the Orient Express, and
nice.
You just see all of these old locations and how they were at the time, and even how people are interacting with each other at the time and how that's progressed. Is really worth considering as you go back and watch some of these older movies.
So the end of the original Sean Connery era, how do you feel the Sean Connery group of films work together?
As they work together, they're pretty good. We live in a time with the Marvel movies and everything where everything's connected and you've got this linear story. Like we've talked about already, that wasn't the case. He meets Blofeld for the first time 3 times or whatever. It's not super concise, but it's kind of one-off movies. They're really entertaining. Like I said before, they kind of revolutionized the action genre.
Nice.
And actor pay. If you look at Diamonds Are Forever, to convince Sean Connery to come back, they gave him $1.3 million or something like that.
Wow.
Which, considering Dr. No was made for $1 million,
right?
Yeah.
You
that's crazy.
That's not even 10 years.
Yeah. Which, by the way, he donated all of that money to what was it? It was some Scottish educational fund.
Oh wow.
Yeah, he really just came back to prove to the producer, which he continuously got in fights with, that they needed him. And so he took all the money from that contract and just gave it away to that educational fund.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right.
He is something else, man. Like reading some of the other stories about Sean Connery and like how he was. I read an article about how like at one point in time he was trying to act, and I don't know if this was on a Bond film or something else, but some girl, the woman that he was acting with, and not that it's okay to do, but like just like at the time, I guess it was, but he like smacked her. He was like, get control of yourself and like get into this scene, and like literally smacked this woman on the set and like kind of like bitched her out about everything. And then like somebody asked him about it like a decade later, and he was like, what's your point? Like, I mean, old school, like real old school. So like, I don't know, like I'm not saying, obviously I'm not pro hitting women, but the fact is like he just did not give two poops about anything. And this was in like very old school man, it seems.
Even all the way into the 90s. He had an interview with Barbara Walters in the 90s and was like, yeah, sometimes you just have to smack a woman if she's being irrational.
Oh, boy.
Like, dude,
he's
check yourself.
He's probably pretty happy that he retired when he did.
Yeah.
Wow. That's pretty cool.
Surprised we haven't seen his name come up in any lawsuits.
Right?
So.
One more thing about Diamonds Are Forever, just that I think is really interesting. The two henchmen, Mr. Wint and Mr. Kidd, one of them is played by an old jazz musician, again, with no acting history. The other one is Crispin Glover's dad. Yeah, he's just as weird as Crispin, I can tell you that.
Really?
His name is Bruce Glover.
Okay.
You need to look this guy up. He is insane. He teaches acting classes in LA to this day.
Oh, wow.
By advertising on just like those little pull tab flyer. Like he is absolutely nuts.
All right.
Diamonds Are Forever, I always say, is my favorite Roger Moore movie because it's like bonkers. It makes no sense, but it has Sean Connery in it, so it has a little bit of legitimacy.
I see.
It's ridiculous and weird.
Well, speaking of Roger Moore, 2 years later, he was James Bond.
Wait. So Roger Moore was in Diamonds Are Forever?
No. I say it's my favorite Roger Moore movie because Roger Moore is known as like the comedic Bond.
Got it.
It's a little more fun, a little more lighthearted.
Campy,
and
right.
During Sean Connery's run, the whole time he wanted to make like serious character pieces, like On Her Majesty's Secret Service, which he wasn't in. And the whole time they're doing all of these like more and more ridiculous things. And what I was saying was Diamonds Are Forever is such a ridiculous, like, should be a Roger Moore movie.
Got it.
Stars Sean Connery. So it's a little grounded because of that.
Well, and speaking of Live and Let Die, it's one of the more bizarre ones that I remember. And here's what I wrote down. This is just me remembering watching it as a kid. Mr. Big is a Harlem drug dealer who gives away heroin for free in an attempt to put his competition out of business. It's later revealed that Mr. Big is actually Dr. Kangakaka, I can't pronounce his name, who is actually a voodoo dictator.
Yep. Yeah, what's the problem? That's all true.
Yeah. That was one of the ones where dude, why was James Bond in Harlem? And why was Paul McCartney writing the song about it?
Well, and here's the interesting thing is Roger Moore, like growing up, being a kid of 1980, like Roger Moore was James Bond for me for the longest time. I didn't even know that Sean Connery played Bond until it was later on, because the ones that were super popular when I was born and like growing up were Octopussy, A View to a Kill, Moonraker. I remember Moonraker. We used to watch that all the time because it took place in space. So
it was on TBS every weekend.
Well, we didn't even have. This is when we were living in Germany and having to watch everything on VHS and borrowing from the video store on all the time. So like, dude, like this is where my James Bond knowledge begins for the most part. And then we can. But anyways, I just wanted to make that commentary about Roger Moore's time.
I will say about Roger Moore, since we're talking about it, it was a huge shift. Like I said before, Roger Moore had like these fun, ridiculous movies, James Bond floating around in space and all this. Whereas Sean Connery's was more grounded and real, which again, a more modern audience, if they went back and revisited the Sean Connery movies, I think they would appreciate for that. If you like Casino Royale, you'll probably like From Russia with Love. Like, it has that same kind of a feel to it. But the Sean Connery era movies, like I kind of hinted at earlier, were kind of viewed as sexist by this point, by the way he treats some of the women and everything. And even going down to the actors, Sean Connery, like you said, Jason, famously smacked around women and didn't seem to have a problem with that. Whereas Roger Moore, with two different ex-wives, was the victim of spousal abuse.
Wow, I didn't know.
He married two different women that smacked him around.
Oh, wow.
So there was this big shift in the mentality in the early 70s. And that is, reflected in not just the character of Bond that was portrayed, but also the actor that played. That's what I got there.
Live and Let Die. Rose Carver was our Bond girl, and Paul McCartney wrote the song for it. Was the song called "Live and Let Die"?
It was. It's one of the better Bond songs too. It's really good. I would actually say the main Bond girl was Solitaire, who was played by what's her name? Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman.
Jane Seymour.
Jane Seymour. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Sorry, motorboating.
Yes.
So
yes. She was actually really, really good in it, and Bond kind of manipulates her into turning against Aficionado, who plays Mr. Big.
Love you. Where does Live and Let Die fall for you? Good, bad, love, hate?
It was in my top 5. It's probably like 6 or 7 now.
Okay.
It's actually really good. You also find with the Roger Moore movies, they start emulating whatever's popular at the time. And this is very much a ripoff of like a blaxploitation film.
That explains the Harlem part.
Exactly.
And then Dr. Kanaga was from like, what country was he from?
I think it was a made up country.
Okay. Gotcha.
Wasn't that played by the guy from In the Heat of the Night?
Yeah, Aficionado. He was Alien, Running Man.
Yeah.
Heat of the Night. Yep. He's awesome. I love him.
Yeah.
He's really good in this. This is the one that has Baron Samedi, who's in the GoldenEye game.
Oh, okay, yeah.
It has a really good cast. It's worth checking out.
1994, 1 year later, so they back-to-back. Roger Moore was The Man with the Golden Gun, which had
74.
74. Yeah, sorry, 74. Which had the awesome villain played by Christopher Lee. This is the one that when we first got on the call, I said this is the one that I didn't remember how ridiculous the plot was. The plot is him trying to harness solar power because the movie is focusing on Britain's energy crisis of the 1970s.
Yep.
I do also have in the notes that it has a lot to do with, apparently they go to a lot of Asian countries, and they, as you said, I assume Bruce Lee was pretty popular right now. They threw a bunch of martial arts into this movie.
This was a year after Enter the Dragon. And there's a scene where Bond learns, there's a scene where Bond learns Kung Fu or whatever they call it in the movie, and
Gotcha.
It's just like the training scene in Enter the Dragon. I will say the budget dropped a lot on this movie. I think it was like 7 million or so.
What was Live and Let Die?
I'm not sure on that.
Oh, okay.
I know they offered Connery like 5 million to return, and he was
wow.
completely over it at that point. So I'm guessing it was quite a bit higher than
Sure.
that.
Okay.
But
so
yeah, like you said, Christopher Lee plays Scaramanga.
Yep.
Who is an assassin who thinks he's the best. So he basically challenges 007 to a duel.
That's the finale, or the like Act 3, right? Is there duel?
Yeah.
And throughout the movie,
his manservant is Harvey Villechaize.
Oh wow!
Who plays Knick-Knack. Such a good character.
Throughout the movie, he's hunting Christopher Lee down because he keeps finding people murdered with golden bullets, correct? From the Golden Gun.
Yep.
And that's where the name of the movie came from. Yeah.
Yeah. So the whole thing is he kind of gets his gun through security, essentially.
Okay.
By piecing it together, like the barrel is part of a pen and all this. So it's kind of, it only holds one bullet. So he has to do one-shot kills as his kind of signature. And he has these like special bullets. So Bond is able to track him down by going to the bullet manufacturer. And,
if I remember right, at one point his girlfriend or whatever turns on him. Like she gives Bond with the bullet. Like she gives him one of the bullets and says like, "I want you." Like this is my boyfriend's bullet. He's the one you're looking for, or something.
Yeah, Bond kind of forces Scaramanga's girlfriend to turn. It's kind of the one time you see Roger Moore get physical with a woman.
Oh, okay.
And it's not in a Sean Connery way. It's in a hostile witness way. Like he tries to smoothly get information out of her, and after he's not getting it, he finally kind of becomes bad cop and does what he has to get the information from her. But yeah, he's kind of able to track him down. You've got the flying car in this one, which is always cool.
Nice. We have one of our so Bond girl names with Mary Goodnight.
Yeah.
Not the greatest, but
she's not the greatest Bond girl either. She's kind of an idiot. She gets trapped in the trunk of the flying car before it takes off. And she like opens the trunk. She's very
Christmas Jones.
I was gonna say Temple of Doom, the girl in that. She's kind of
Kate Capshaw's character.
Yes. She's kind of the unwitting idiot who he has to go in and save. But it's entertaining if you like Christopher Lee.
Okay.
He does a great job, and Harvey Villechaize is he almost wants Christopher Lee to lose so that he can take over.
Oh, interesting.
Boss. Yeah. So it's kind of a fun
A couple of years later, we got The Spy Who Loved Me, which introduced us to Jaws. But the main villain was megalomaniac Karl Stromberg, who wants to destroy the world and build an underwater civilization.
Because he has webbed hands. Duh.
That's what I would do if I had webbed hands.
So explain this Bond movie to me, please.
Yeah, I mean, you pretty much hit it.
Why was this the plot? I don't remember late 70s deciding anything about underwater stuff.
You got me. So the director of this movie directed 3 Bond movies, and they all have the same plot.
Wait, what?
He did You Only Live Twice. He did this one, and he did Moonraker. Okay. And they all start off with a ship being captured by the bad guy, trying to turn nuclear powers against each other, and having a secret society elsewhere that will survive the fallout.
Okay.
It makes no sense, but they did it 3 times. So,
but they gave us Jaws in this movie, which was a plus. He was a fun villain.
Yeah. Richard Kiel who's in Happy Gilmore.
Yep.
Those are the only 3 movies I know him from.
Yep.
But yeah, he was really good in this. There's a good moment where Bond stops him by turning on a big magnet, and
yes,
his get connected to the magnet, and he can't get away.
Yep.
Classic.
Growing up in the 80s, I ended up they had to put caps on some of my teeth, and they were silver caps.
Nice.
And so, like, my 2 older brothers used to always make fun of me, and like they started calling me Jaws. But I thought it was awesome. I was like, "Yeah, I'm Jaws. I'm."
Hell yeah! I think he bites through it like a
huge cable. Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, no, Jaws is a badass in this movie.
Yeah.
In this one, he's a badass.
Our Bond girl, I can't really do anything with her name. Anya Amasova. Yeah, pretty lame.
Sorry.
Yeah. Moving on to Moonraker.
So I will say this was probably the best Roger Moore movie as far as kind of taking things seriously and production value. It's a pretty solid spy film.
Okay.
For the most part.
Sorry, I just read that one of the Bond girls is Dr. Holly Goodhead.
Yeah, she is.
Were you still talking about The Spy Who Loved Me, or are you saying Moonraker is one of the best Roger Moore
production value-wise?
Oh no, I was still talking about The Spy Who Loved Me.
My fault. Right. Sorry.
Yeah, cool.
So the real quickly, just to track the budgets like we were talking about earlier. So The Man with the Golden Gun was 74 and the budget was $7 million.
Okay.
The Spy Who Loved Me was 77. They doubled the budget to 14 million.
Wow.
And then Moonraker was 79 and the budget exploded to 34 million.
Oh wow. They had to build that space station.
I guess.
I mean, Star Wars just came out, right?
Yeah, so if we're moving on to Moonraker, like I said before, they were kind of hitting on whatever was popular at the time.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, this was 79. New Hope was 77.
Yep.
They're like, oh, people love space. Close Encounters of the Third Kind. So it's a pretty deep cut reference to that. There's a keypad where he has to enter numbers, and the sounds match the dun, 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 dun,
oh yeah,
as he enters numbers.
And as you said, the villain wants to destroy everybody on Earth while his space people are safe.
Yep. Underwater, they're in space.
Yep. And
they didn't even like stretch on this one. It was just like, hey, grab that script we just got done filming.
Oh yeah,
flip it around a little bit. We're gonna double your budget. Don't worry about it.
And this has literally nothing to do with the book.
Oh really?
Yeah. So to be fair, a lot of these movies use just the name of the book and not a lot of the plot. This one, they use the name of the villain and that's it. They don't leave. This is actually the only book where they don't leave the island of England.
Until they go in space.
Right.
No, it's about missiles.
Yeah.
He stops a missile launch. That's it. In the book.
Right.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Oh, gotcha.
And as Jason said, this is one of the better Bond girls, Dr. Holly Goodhead. Great Bond girl name. I'm not sure. I don't know.
Oh, okay.
I know very few of the women at this point. I knew Jane Seymour.
Yeah.
That was about it.
I'm looking it up.
They very often, back before I would say the mid 80s, they would hire Bond girls for their look and not necessarily their acting chops. And so they would go on to do, super low budget things or just kind of appearances as a former Bond girl, basically. There were a couple that stuck around, but not many.
Lois Chiles.
Yeah.
Never heard of her.
No. That was Moneypenny. Wasn't that Moneypenny?
No. Holly Goodhead is Lois Chiles. Miss Moneypenny is Louise Maxwell or Lois Maxwell.
That's right.
All right. So,
Yeah.
is there anything else important to say about Moonraker?
Jaws comes back.
Right, and in space.
He's ridiculous. He becomes Bond's best friend by the end of the movie. I don't know.
Yeah, he does.
So basically, the whole master race in space thing. Bond points out that Jaws, who is super tall and ridiculous and not the blonde-haired, blue-eyed, yeah, exactly. And his girlfriend, who's this short little pig-tailed ridiculous girl.
I forgot about her.
Yeah. So Bond is like, hey, neither of you two are going to be accepted in this new society. You should just turn and help me. And they're like, yeah, we should. Okay. You're right. There's also a scene at the beginning where it's when Jaws is first introduced in this movie. You find out that henchmen are basically unionized, I guess. And so Hugo Drax, which is the villain for this one, calls the Henchman Society and is like, hey, I need a new henchman.
What?
So they give him Jaws. So Jaws is introduced. Bond is on this airplane, and some bad guy is flying the plane, and Bond gets into a fight and whatever. And Jaws comes out of the bathroom where he's been hiding for the entire flight. And so they fight a little bit. Bond grabs the only parachute and jumps out of the plane. Jaws jumps after him without a parachute. So Bond, does his parachute and flies away or whatever. Jaws starts flapping his arms like a bird, lands on a circus tent, and is apparently fine.
Is that where he meets the pigtail girl? Isn't that what it?
Yeah.
What's up? Yeah.
That's the kind of Roger Moore goodness you get.
Oh.
I will say, you this is something I've talked to you about, Shane. You see throughout the Bond movies this kind of ebb and flow of ridiculousness. So you've got this build up to You Only Live Twice, which I said is the main basis for Austin Powers. Mm-hmm. So, it's kind of super ridiculous and over the top. And then they go down to On Her Majesty's Secret Service, which is super character driven. Really a good movie outside of the ridiculous allergy thing. And this is another one, it's the fourth movie that Roger Moore has made. It's super over the top. You've got this $34 million budget that's, bloated. And then going into the next movie, this is a good segue.
Yeah,
they go
For
to
Your Eyes Only. Yep.
Which is again another smaller movie. They focus on characters, and it's a theme you see throughout everything. So.
And this is the one that you had mentioned earlier. The opening scene of it is Bond at the gravesite, and it has the Blofeld cameo. But because the lawsuit you were talking about was going on, they literally couldn't credit him as Blofeld, but the actor is dressed the exact same way. And if I remember right, this is one of the actors that is trying to look like Donald Pleasance. They've got the bald guy again with the cat and everything.
Yep. They didn't show his head, but he had the bald cap and he had the white cat. He was in a wheelchair because of the way Diamonds Are Forever ended. He was kind of jostled around a little bit. And they definitely made you think that this was Blofeld.
And then he's not in the rest of the movie at all. They just wanted him for that opening scene. They
kill him. They drop him down a smokestack.
So let's see. Aristotle.
Oh, yes!
You remember that? Bond is flying a helicopter, and he picks up the wheelchair with the helicopter and just drops this disabled person into a smokestack.
Let's see you wheel your way out of this one.
So the real villain of this movie is Aristotle Christastos, who pretends to be Bond's film throughout the movie, and then you find out he's actually the one that has this secret hidden missile command center.
Sure.
Yeah. Tell me what really happens in this movie.
So I gotta say, this one is one that I kind of have a love-hate relationship with.
All right.
I remember not liking, And then about 5 years ago, when I wrote all those articles that you mentioned, I really liked it.
Okay.
It was one of those down to earth kind of character pieces, and I was like, yeah, this is one that's really worth watching. And then the last time I rewatched it, I was kind of bored to tears.
Oh, wow.
There are some good moments and there's some ridiculous moments, but overall, it's kind of forgettable.
Melina Havelock is our Bond girl, and she's trying to seek revenge because apparently this dude killed her parents also.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very kind of it's another thing you see with Bond girls who either have the the damsel in distress that he has to save, or you have the one that's out for revenge. Jill Masterson in Goldfinger is trying to revenge her. Her sister was murdered by Goldfinger. Thunderball, you see it. There are a couple of later ones where the Bond girl has a loved one that died, and they're kind of badasses in their own right and trying to get revenge.
Right on. So after you're hating it, loving it, crying over it, where does it rank in your Bond movies?
It's so middling that it's kind of towards the bottom.
Okay.
Like there are Roger Moore movies that I love because they're ridiculous and over the top and fun. And there are, Sean Connery and Daniel Craig have like good movies that have good plots and good character pieces and stuff. And this one is so middle of the road that it's not super fun and it's not super good and it's just kind of there. So it kind of depends on the time as to whether or not I like it.
Right on. We're going to move on to 1983 now, which is the second time that we have two Bond movies in the same year. This time they were spaced out a little bit farther, but in June of 83, we got Octopussy, which was still another Roger Moore one. Octopussy is the name of our Bond girl, so they did good.
Only there was a good double entendre here.
Yeah. Because we've got Kamal Khan as our villain.
Yep.
Wait. Now, where was Pussy Galore?
That was Goldfinger.
Okay, that's what I thought. Okay.
They just went right for it with Octopussy in this one.
How they got away with putting this on posters?
Could you imagine doing that now?
No, that would not fly now.
Could the three of us write and make a movie called Decapussy and just slap it on the marquee at our theater and get away with it?
Absolutely not.
I'm gonna say no.
Let's try it.
So Kamal Khan is a thief who's stealing stuff from the Soviet government. What was he stealing, and why was he doing it?
He's stealing mostly Fabergé eggs.
We've had a long conversation about this movie. The Fabergé egg movie.
He was stealing it from the Federal Reserve, and then he had somebody that would make like forgery duplicates, and would put the duplicates back in the Federal Reserve and then sell the real ones at auction to make a bunch of money.
And then Bond tracked him down.
Yeah. There's a pretty cool scene at one of the auctions where Kamal Khan is trying to buy back the egg.
Okay.
And Bond is trying to outbid him, but he's able to kind of sleight of hand switch the fake for the real one.
Oh.
So then the whole time Kamal Khan has the fake one. So it's kind of an interesting ripple. He puts a little tracking device in there, so he's able to kind of track everything down.
Very nice.
And then there's a really good kind of a most dangerous game scene where they are in, I believe, India. Don't quote me on that. And Kamal Khan and his like group of people are trying to hunt down Bond through the jungle. And there's like a tiger that Bond runs into, and
Oh, because they go back to the third act is in Kamal Khan's like home country or something, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
It's one of those super uneven movies where there's some scenes that I really don't care for, and there are some that are really cool, like that scene where they're trying to hunt him down, and he's running into crocodiles and tigers, and Kamal Khan's like riding an elephant trying to hunt him.
That's right. Yo.
Yeah. It's one that's worth watching, but go in knowing that it's a little ridiculous.
Sure. So October of 1983, we got the OG Bond back. Sean Connery comes back with Never Say Never Again, which I have written down literally the exact same plot as Thunderball from 1965.
Do you know why?
So Sean Connery literally remade a Sean Connery movie. I understand this had a lot to do with that lawsuit you were talking about from the guy who was not credited with Thunderball. And this wasn't an Eon Pictures, right? This was a different company?
It was. Yeah. So this other guy, Kevin McClure, won the lawsuit. So he got the rights to Thunderball. So he went to, I think, Universal.
Okay.
And was like, hey, I've got the rights to this James Bond movie. We should do something with it. And so they just basically remade the script, like you said. It's called Never Say Never Again because Sean Connery, after Diamonds Are Forever, in an interview was asked if he would ever play Bond again. He said never again. And so when this movie came out, they were like, well, never say never again because you're playing Bond again.
So that makes me wonder, like, obviously that's not what they called the script, because when they wrote this script, they had no idea Sean Connery was going to get cast. Like, you think they just called the script Thunderball 2? Or Thunderball Again? Or...
Thunderball.
They might have just named it Thunderball.
The Thunderball.
Obviously that was a marketing thing where they were like, oh, we got Sean Connery to do this movie. This is what we're going to name it. I literally want to know what the name of that script was, though.
I kind of do.
Thunderball.
The interesting casting thing about this is they actually had George Lazenby almost signed to make this movie.
No
he had a
way.
few parts because he had not really done anything in 10 years. So he did a change of heart and was willing to come back to the part of Bond. But then Sean Connery was like, oh, yeah, I want to stick it to the producers that screwed me over for 8 years. And I want to make this competing Bond movie. And so they told George Lazenby to take a hike, and they got Sean Connery back.
Do you know the production budget's difference between Thunderball and Never Say Never Again?
I do not.
Was it a pretty... it has to be a big difference.
I would assume so, yeah. I will say there's some interesting things about Never Say Never Again that I might like it more than Octopussy.
Okay, but do you like it better than Thunderball? Between Thunderball and its remake, which one are better?
I really don't like Thunderball.
Okay. All right, that's fair enough.
I will say what this one has going for it is it's directed by Irvin Kershner.
Oh, well, yes.
Who did Empire Strikes Back and RoboCop 2. So he did a string of sequels.
Okay, yeah.
3 movies in a row that were sequels to good movies.
Yep.
It had Kim Basinger as the Bond girl. And Max von Sydow played Blofeld.
Oh, yeah. Yep, that is
so
true.
Max von Sydow and Sean Connery, they both signed on to multi-picture deals. They were going to make a competing franchise.
Oh, wow.
And then this one didn't quite do well enough, and they didn't pursue that any further. But I would have loved to see Max von Sydow.
Do they ever... do they have a scene together in that movie?
No.
I was just saying, I don't remember them ever being on screen at the same time in that movie.
They extended Blofeld's presence a little bit from Thunderball, just because they got Max von Sydow.
Sure.
Thunderball, Blofeld was in, I think, 2 scenes. In this one, he was in like 3 or 4.
Right on.
But he wasn't the main villain. Yeah. It's cool to watch Sean Connery play a 1980s era video game.
Sure. Well, because he was what, in his 50s by this point?
At least, yeah.
Maybe somewhere in his 50s when he played Bond at that time. And was competing with Roger Moore, who, I don't know how old Roger Moore was at that point, but...
He's actually older than Sean Connery.
What?
He's a year and a half older than Sean Connery.
So I had two 50-year-old James Bonds in the same year.
You sure did.
Wow. Never knew that.
Never say never, Shane.
You watched Honestly, you watch these last three Roger Moore movies, and it's super uncomfortable.
Okay.
For Your Eyes Only, there's like a 16 or 17-year-old figure skater who's trying to hit on him, and he's like pushing her away. And then in Octopussy and A View to a Kill, like he's just so old and awkward when he kisses the Bond girls. It looks like he's trying to steal their youth. Like, I think he's a Disney villain, maybe.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, trying to like absorb their energy so that he can face off against the bad guy. I don't know. It's not great.
As you just jumped to A View to the Kill, or A View to a Kill, Roger Moore's final outing. So, 1983, we saw the end of Sean Connery. He never again played Bond. 2 years later, 85, we had Roger Moore, final appearance as James Bond in A View to a Kill. Christopher Walken was a great villain in this movie.
So good.
Dude, when is he not good in a movie?
Really stupid plot.
Really bad movies.
Yes.
He can be in a really bad movie, but he's kind of like Sam Rockwell before Sam Rockwell. Like,
sure,
he's always good in whatever he's in, even if it's not that great of a film.
Yep.
Like,
this is what I take from Christopher Walken. He won an Oscar for Deer Hunter, and then he said, fuck it. I'm going to have fun for the next 40 years. And he just took whatever bonkers roles he could find and just went nuts. This is my guilty pleasure Bond movie. It is not good, but
Grace Jones is in this one, right?
Yeah, Grace Jones is in it. I went to London in 2016.
Why did anybody ever think that she should be a sex icon in the 80s? I will never understand it.
Nope.
She was also in Conan.
Yep.
Yeah.
No. Give me.
She wasn't like super muscular either. Like,
no, she just
like in both of those movies, she's kind of portrayed
scary.
as a badass.
Yeah.
Yeah. But like, it's not like she has like these rippling muscles or anything. Like, I get like Brigitte Nelson had that, that she's
physique.
Super strong, badass kind of a thing. But yeah, like I was saying, I went to London in 2016. Flying back, on the little TV in the seat back in front of me, they had all of the Bond movies, and this was the one I watched. It's
nice.
It's very comforting for me for whatever reason. Like, it's
the Duran Duran song. That's what it is.
Maybe it's like, really good song.
That is a great song. Like, isn't this what? Didn't they win an Oscar for it?
Probably.
I feel like this is one of the, because I know a couple of Bond songs have won Oscars, and I feel like this is one of them.
Yeah. To that point, Marvin Hamlish has an EGOT. He did the music for Moonraker. And that's how he got an Oscar. Yeah.
Very cool. Any final thoughts or words you want to say on Roger Moore before we move on?
Like we were kind of saying, he's super silly. There's a place for him. I loved him as a kid. I kind of grew out of him.
Okay.
But I do like revisiting a few of the movies. Not necessarily because they're good, but because they're fun and they have good villains.
Sure.
So I would kind of put A View to a Kill in that same category as The Man with the Golden Gun. They're not good movies, but you have like over the top villains that are committing, and they have really good actors in those parts, and it makes it worth watching.
Awesome. So that's where we're going to cut this week short. About an hour and 20 minutes in. We got about another hour and 20 minutes to go, covering Timothy Dalton, Pierce Brosnan, and Daniel Craig, all their films, the GoldenEye video game, James Bond Jr., We get into a lot of fun conversation there. So come back next week and we will conclude this James Bond conversation.